convinced them not to perform in Sun City together with Paul Simon. They rejected us. They said the money is too good to support this campaign to bring nonviolent approach to change in South Africa through the cultural boycott. I just want to make mention of that because I refuse now to pay Paul Simon or Ray Charles on my radio program for the last, 30, 40 years because of this position they've taken. Also, in terms of the ANC itself, there seems to be two tendencies in ANC. Of course, the corporate ANC, as well as the socialist or the social democratic aspect of the ANC. How do you see that struggle evolving within the ANC, or is it going to be a third-party formation given the Democratic Town Alliance that really doesn't have much popular support?
Well, as already noted, Julius Malema, who was ousted from the African National Congress Youth League leadership because he ran afoul in part of President Jacob Zuma, has started a new party, the Economic Freedom Fighters. We'll see what happens in a few months if they're able to make a mark. But it seems to me, at least, that the struggle is going to take place within the ANC. Just like in Zimbabwe, I think the struggle basically takes place within the ZANU-PF. And the ZANU-PF Congresses is basically where the progressive and democratic forces tangle and come into conflict and work out positions. And to that end, I have to make an editorial judgment, which is that I do think that the ANC took a wrong turn a few years ago when then President Thabo Mbeki, who succeeded Nelson Mandela, was basically ousted in a palace coup, which was very murky. And in fact, apartheid-era prosecutors and judges had a lot to do with that ouster because they claimed, and I think inaccurately, that he was scheming and plotting against his eventual successor, Jacob Zuma, and that outraged a lot of ANC leaders and comrades, and they ousted Thabo, putting in Jacob Zuma, and we were told at the time, interestingly by the New York Times, which meant that should have been disbelieved, that Jacob Zuma was now going to lead the ANC in South Africa to the left, that he was going to put pressure on Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. Well, all of that turned out to be false. And in fact, I must say, I think the ANC in South Africa took a step backwards when Jacob Zuma was installed in the presidency. Right now, he's involved in the latest of many scandals. His compound in Nkonlo, where his 3, 4, 5 wives, I've lost count, basically have different palatial settings for which they can entertain, where he used state funds to basically subsidize that construction. But having said that, I do think that the South African regime, when compared to the pressure that it's under from the NATO bloc, it's moving generally in a direction that I hope will accelerate after these elections that take place in a few months. That is to say, closer relations with the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and much more of an anti-imperialist posture in the international arena.
Let me ask you this. Jacob Zuma, Thabo Mbeki, Nelson Mandela were part of Oko Wizizwe, the military wing of the ANC, and were involved with, I think, almost a 10-year campaign of bombings and militant armed struggle against the Dutch Boer government and settler population of South Africa, which is also not put out there in terms of the general portrayal of Brother Madiba Nelson Mandela, who's part of the armed struggle. Now that Nelson Mandela has crossed over, many have argued he was a glue that kept internal contradictions from becoming antagonistic inside the ANC and inside society. Now that the brother has crossed over to the ancestor world, do you see his central personality, his symbolic, iconic role, now having crossed over, will open up the contradictions within South Africa?
Well, I really don't think so. I mean, now, if you were to ask me about Zimbabwe, I think one of the reasons why Robert Mugabe has stayed on so long is that if he were to cross over, I think that scenario that you just sketched would erupt within ZANU-PF. But keep in mind that Mandela has been off the scene for a number of years now. He basically retired, even from traveling globally, about 4, 5, 6 years ago. And so I don't really see that kind of internal divisiveness erupting now that he's passed away. In fact, I'm hoping that now that he's passed away, it will open up more of a turn to the left, more of a turn to redistribution of the wealth, which is desperately needed in South Africa.
Well, my brother, we have about 30 seconds left. Any final words on the situation in South Africa?
Well, yes, I would have to stress once again, and that we really have to beat back the corporate media campaign to whitewash the Mandela legacy, to make it seem as the United States was on the side of the angels during the struggle against apartheid when it was on the side of the devils, quite frankly.
Thank you.
We have to raise up the role of the Cuban troops in particular, which were decisive in defeating apartheid.
I think we also need to acknowledge the role of Morocco, providing a space, and Ethiopia for Nelson Mandela to be trained militarily. I think His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie gave the ANC and Nelson Mandela his first weapon, his first gun came from His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, as well as, once again, they were trained in Ethiopia, as well as the FLN of Algeria, based in Morocco, provided training for the ANC when they made the leap from nonviolent to armed struggle. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Gerald Horne. And in closing, I'd like to thank Brother Billion, Sister Tage, Brother Ray, and all guests who have chosen to stand up against the empire to speak truth to power. This afternoon program and the 10 prior programs can be reheard at kpfk.org under audio archives. Scroll to Freedom Now. As always, we stand.